So first of all, I have never spoken for 45 minutes in my life. My mother, and I'm sure Seb, my assistant, would disagree, but in any structured format, I've never spoke for 45 minutes. So this is a very new format to me. I'm obviously honoured to be here to talk about inequality and education. But I would actually, to bear with me in terms of doing a PowerPoint is really big for me, in the sense that, like, I can't follow the steps, to bake a cake. Steps, I can't do them, I usually just jump in and start at A and finish wherever I'm out. I can't follow a process. So you might see me flipping back and forward, but it's usually just because maybe my whole life hasn't been a one straightforward process. So I think that's still how I operate. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, obviously I came through the Trinity Access programme. I left school very early, I left at 15, but to be honest, I left a lot earlier than that. I actually left at about 13, 14, but they allowed me back when I was 15 to sit my junior cert when I was becoming a mother. I suppose my whole journey through, when I'm explaining education, I always do it in a way, not so much talking about theory and going into like Bordeaux or Rousseau and looking at inequality. I do it step by step through my own journey and what I noticed along the way, so that it can be a little bit more based around a human's experience, because I think sometimes when we talk about theory or we talk about things at large, it can become very abstract and people stop associating it with people's actual personal experiences. So that's pretty much how the presentation will go today. Even though the PowerPoint is up there, it does incorporate a lot of my own life and my own experience from birth up until now. So the first slide that we have there is a college, a school in Dublin 1, and it's Belvedere College. And in 2015, 98% of students progressed to university from that school. And just a few minutes down the road, there's another school, and it's about 10 minutes away. It's a smaller school, it's less privileged, and it's the one that mainly the local kids go to, so it's more community-based than the other one. And 1 in 65 students from that other school progressed on to third level education, and that's literally how close they are apart. And the only difference between one and the other is one is public and one is private. Why that is and why them statistics actually exist, I kind of cover throughout the rest of the presentation. So in every Leaving Cert class, obviously you have a number of students. And the likelihood of you progressing onto university degree is usually predicted by what your mother and father do. So it's usually based on what your parents do. And higher professionals usually have up to 100% rate of their children going on to third level. But if you come from a non-manual background, that drops to 23%. Now that's obviously a huge difference. So, it goes into then, do we break the cycle? How do we break education inequality? Do you break it with the parent first so that it ripples down? Or how do you, at what part do you begin to address it? So then obviously it comes hand in hand with income inequality. So do you improve the situation of the parents so that it increases their income, so that they can then provide the resources that their child needs to go on to third level education? But then you're into other areas, which I'll also go into, around social capital and cultural capital, which even if you have plenty of financial capital, which some families in working class areas have progressed towards in relation to, the boom years and construction, and they made money, but they still had a massive deficit in information. So it didn't help all the time. So there's loads of different areas, I suppose, that we need to be addressing rather than focusing on one single thing, which is financial capital. So in Dublin 6, there's a 99% chance that you'll go on to third level education. And that changes by the time you get to Dublin 17, it's a 15% chance. Now, I suppose 2 weeks ago, I spoke in Belvedere College, and it's something that kind of has affected me for the last 2 weeks, even though I'm very much aware of the situation for myself and my peers in our community. There was a sentence, I suppose, in the speaker. There was 4 speakers on the panel. And what happened was she was giving an amazing speech and I was listening, but there was just one sentence, and that sentence that she referred to was where her 10 best friends were. And all the girls were listening, and Alexandra College is a boarding college, a fee-paying school. And she explained that she had friends in Italy, in America, and she explained some of the professions, what they were doing. Now, she was the first speaker, so I was trying to kind of digest that while the other speakers were speaking. And why it meant so much to me was, by the time she got to me, it kind of the penny dropped, because I was trying to think, well, where are my 10 best friends? And where are they? And I got quite upset really trying to go through them in my head. So I done an audit of my friends while the other two speakers. And it was dead, addiction, dead. And it just kind of went along like that. And there was several obviously friends in there that have made it, but still struggling, still no education, single parents, trying to raise their kids, all of that. So it's not that, you know, everything seems bleak for all of us, but even the people that are still living in deprivation, that have survived, often still don't even realise that things should be any different than what's there. And they think that they are responsible for changing the outcome completely for their children. But they think that without the context of understanding how society is made up and all the barriers that are in their way. So it can get really, really, you know, it can get very tiring if they're doing that without actually having the understanding of what's happening. You know, just like in relation to me and that girl, when I was looking at her, like it was very obvious to me that I'm no less able or willing or intelligent than anyone from Dublin 6. And neither are my friends and neither are my children. I suppose, you know, people think they want to look at parents and go, you know, well, it's the parents' fault. And, you know, I can guarantee you that, you know, no child in any other part of the country is loved any less because they're from a working class area. And, you know, it's definitely not lack of love or lack of want for somebody that stops you going on to third level education. I don't believe that people from communities like mine were born to be criminals or born to be addicts or born to be social welfare dependent. And I think sometimes that has become part of our identity or part of our culture, where somebody will look and say, well, they've chose that. Well, why don't they just get a job, or why don't they just go to college, or free fees exist, why haven't they taken that up? You know, and somehow poverty has become our identity. And when we look at anywhere else that has an identity, if you look at gender recognition, if you look at traveller ethnicity, we recognise their identities because it gives them a level of empowerment, hopefully, and freedom and recognition. And I don't want to ever accept poverty as our identity, as some sort of recognition of who we are, because, you know, that's who we'll stay, and it's definitely not someone's part of their culture to want to live in poverty. You know, so after your woman was finished speaking and I got up, and I obviously changed my whole speech by the time it got to me and started again, and I gave them that story really. And what it came down to for me was that I keep going on about education, equality. And I suppose over the last 6 months I've gone on a bit of a journey with it, because I do see education as the most powerful tool for change. And I do see it's how transformative that it is. But I'm probably being a little bit maybe too hopeful that focusing on education alone can change everything, you know. And I've begun to look at, we need to shave things right back to basics and look at inequality, especially as someone that stands in the chamber and you hear people talk about, you know, the effects of poverty. So they're talking about homelessness, they're talking about addiction, they're talking about education and third level. But nobody is really stripping it right back down to why that exists. And we can't really keep fighting at all those higher levels if we don't come back to the very basic of the fact that, you know, if you're born in Dublin 24 in comparison to Dublin 6, your life is determined before you've even left the hospital. And we need to go back to that, you know, and look at education inequality along with income inequality and along with the other forms of capital. So I also believe that we're looking to fix things at the wrong end. So we pump money into treating addiction. We pump money into the prison services. We pump money into the homeless services. So it's about trying to somehow scrape all them resources back from that end. And if you put them into the other end where the inequality is created to help change that long term, you know, but the money and the focus is at the wrong end. And maybe this is a bit cynical, but it's, you know, I feel that end has become a business and they don't want to let it go. You know, I worked in addiction for a very, very long time. And one of the main things that disturbed me before I left was I felt like I wasn't working in a community sector anymore. I felt like it had dragged me to business. and filling out forms, and all of a sudden the heroin addict in front of me was a certain figure of money, and I needed to get more heroin addicts if I was going to get more money. So why would I treat them and get them better when that piece of money relies on them being an addict? You know, so we're pumping all this money into this new business of addiction at the other end, and you know, that's really worrying, because we need to be investing. Like, if you look at most young men in the prison system have no leaving cert. The majority of them have no leaving cert. And obviously costs us €100,000 to house them a year in the prison system. And it's supposed to be a rehabilitative kind of setting, but it's not, you know, it's just a holding place really for a period of time. And, you know, but we pump all that money in at that end. And can you imagine, I suppose, the lives of them young men if that 100,000 a year was pumped into them from the time they were born within their communities, and the effect that that would have. So again, it's just another example of us doing things backwards, because somehow it benefits people for us to do it backwards. See, I'm forgetting the PowerPoint. I told you I'm not good at PowerPoint. So I'm just going to ignore that, right, for a while anyway. But I suppose I've tried to use my position as a politician to name some of these things and talk about these issues, and I try and do them as best I can in a setting that I wouldn't usually have access to. Trinity College, for example, and the students there, and the type of students that go there, and the people that have put me where I am, which shows me that they want change, because they wouldn't have voted someone in like me with that message if they didn't want to be part of the change of equality for people. And I think that's something, you know, that we need to focus on. But you know, you don't choose your oppressions and you don't choose your privileges. And when I go and I talk in private schools, or I chaired a debating competition the weekend, and I try to talk to them about that, about privilege and oppression. And it's not about making someone else feel guilty because they're in a privileged position. But let's face it, we're all born by accident into a certain place. So it's about what we do with it then. And people that are in a position of privilege, which I am now, you know, and it's about what can I give back. But if I'm born into that privilege, what can you do? But it will always be an unequal transaction, because you don't want my oppression in return. And if I could give you something in return for making my situation better growing up, I would. But the problem all I have is my oppression, and you don't want that, you know. So privilege can transform things, where oppression just makes things worse for everyone. I'm going to go down, I think, to the privilege walk we did in Trinity College. So I suppose I keep trying to address these issues in a certain way that's not threatening, and it's not blaming anyone, but it's looking how we can all make a change. And the privilege walk was one of them. But before I get to it, they're just some of the statistics in relation to moving on to third level education. And they really haven't changed that much over the years, which I suppose is another reason why we know that free fees hasn't worked, because we haven't looked at the social and cultural capital along with the financial, and that's the only reason why free fees didn't work, which I found actually quite amusing. This morning in the Education Committee, Peter Cassells and a few others, and they're talking about how a loan system will increase the number of students from the poorest backgrounds and the most disadvantaged backgrounds into third level education. And I can't believe I'm part of this debate a year, and it never even dawned on me that way. So you're saying the poorest of the poorest kids won't take free education, but they'll take education that they can pay for later? So like, the argument makes no sense, like in terms of income, like in terms of trying to paint income contingent loans as some reason that disadvantaged kids will now be able to go to college, because it's not true, you know. It's simply not true. And there's so many different research, especially in America and Wisconsin and stuff, that looks at you know, debt aversion and the types of people that won't take out loans. And the main bulk of the research is around migrant people, but I'm going to assume that it would be similar as well in Ireland for people that come from the poorest backgrounds. All right. Right, so it's not the privilege walk, yeah. I told us I can't follow steps. Right, so going back to what Richard, I suppose, was saying in relation to it's not all about third level, and it happens much earlier on, and these problems do manifest themselves way before university age. And we see across the board that your future income will be predicted by the number of words that you know by the time that you're 5. And that the number of words you know is impacted on by the type of school you go to. by poverty, your parents' education, and by community and by where you're raised. This is also seen in math and other subjects. Literacy in deaf schools, 30% of children in disadvantaged primary schools have severe literacy problems, and up to 50% have some literacy difficulties. Disadvantaged post-primary schools achieve lower reading literacy scores nationwide. And it's hard to, I suppose, make any movement on that in relation to resources as well, because, you know, even psychological assessments and learning assessments is so hard to access when you're in a school that doesn't have any resources. So you don't get, people think there's extra resources there. They exist, but unfortunately, to actually get them, the money doesn't exist to have them issues diagnosed so that you can have extra help within the classroom. In relation to math, in 27% of second level schools, a fifth of students took honour level maths junior cert. Over half of these, which is 54%, were designated disadvantaged. Conversely, there were 59 schools or more where more than 60% were doing higher level mathematics, and 78% of those were fee paying. In 2008, 79 schools had no students sit the honour level Leaving Cert maths, and these were all from disadvantaged schools. In relation as well, I suppose, to some of my own research, which I've been involved in over the years in terms of literacy, and I'm probably making a giant leap here, but I'm going to make it, and Fiona, who carried the research out with me, isn't there, so she's going to back me up, aren't you? I know you are. But when we done a piece of research with middle ranking drug dealers, and there was about 10, I think, only in the sample. But what was a common theme throughout them all was, or at least in most of them, was that they were nearly all dyslexic. And, you know, wondering, I suppose, left us wondering, I suppose, that we need to obviously do another piece of research to back that up and widen it out and see if there's some sort of connection. But the fact that nearly all of them were dyslexic does shows, you know, how we can move to criminality throughout our lives if our learning disabilities aren't addressed and if the schools don't cater to us in the way that they should. So the next piece is on Maslow's theory, right? But I usually take that and I look at it in terms of how do I explain why we don't reach that self-actualization or that success piece. And I think it can be explained pretty simple through Maslow's theory. And, you know, looking at the very first basis of that being the psychological, you know, looking at food and water and sleep, you know, and exertion. And the amount of kids, I suppose, that go through third level, that go through primary level, not even having that basic need met. And, you know, trying to sit in a classroom and trying to learn and coming from chaotic situations. Obviously, the next one is safety, coming from maybe a chaotic life at home, in a very chaotic community. And societal inequalities, I suppose, have eroded away the basis on which children and adults can reach their potential through policy, income, inequality, and a monopoly on social capital. The next piece, I had to hide where the research came from because it's not published yet, but it's on a new access programme that has been launched, and they looked at the direct entry into the university, and they also looked at the ones that came into, say, the Irish equivalent to a HEAR scheme or to an access scheme. And it goes back to, I suppose, the parental job that exists, and just the difference between the two. And why I put that one after the Maslow's theory was another reason that we need to stop trying to fix things at the other end, at third level. So we create access groups as a way to, again, fix things at the wrong end instead of looking at inequality from the very beginning. So when we do this, most of the needs of them children that are now adults haven't been met, you know, so they're starting in third level university, but they possibly are still probably not in a safe situation, or they're still not probably living in any sort of way that they've enough means to, you know, be eating regular meals, good food, all of that kind of thing. And so these children will start off and they'll be in the same classrooms, but they're just coming from a very different lifestyle, and then they've just to operate within universities. And still at third level, obviously you need a massive amount of support to be able to progress through your degree. This was a quote from an Access student. People think that giving everyone equal opportunity is letting them sit the exam and sitting it on the same day. But there is people who actually don't have the same advantages as other people. So they need to kind of bridge the gap. It's like telling someone who is 5'2" to reach something that is on the top of the shelf and that they can't reach. And then asking someone who is 6 foot to reach it, and clearly that is kind of unfair because they have to do the same thing, but it's not equity in the sense that one person hasn't got the advantage as the other. They have not got the height to start with, and that's a young Access student. And this is the privilege walk that we done in Trinity on Front Square, which is obviously a very symbolic place to do it because it is seen as an elite institution. And we invited hundreds of students from all different backgrounds, from the travelling background, ones that English wasn't their first language. This is only a small clip, so just to give you an idea, the Vice Provost participated, people that had a lot of privileges growing up that also didn't realise that some of those things were even giving them a head start over other children that entered university or school alongside them. So I'll just show you this clip.
The symbolism of Trinity is about the walls, and I think what we're talking about today is how we can break those down and how actually internally those kind of barriers don't exist here.
It's kind of hard to realise that just what you're born with can have a really strong impact upon where you end up in relation to other people.
One of the things that we really want to celebrate today is the fact that we have such a diverse population.
This is a place where we're trying to actually tackle really sensitive issues like this.
And even in a fairly privileged community like this, you can see through a simple exercise that in fact there's enormous diversity of entitlement, of rights and of privileges across a small group of people.
It's important that people don't feel bad about their privileges, so to speak. I mean, nobody chooses their privileges, but what we can choose is what we do about them.
Sometimes we can't see the other people that are less privileged, or we refuse to see them. So I think it's very important for us all to be able to view each other and see whereabouts we are, not to make each other feel bad about where we're at, but so that we can find a way that we can all come together and reach a common objective of having no oppression and no privilege, and everybody being of equal status, no matter where they come from.
If you have a visible or invisible disability, take one step backwards. Outside with religious holidays that you celebrate, take one step forward.
If you were able to progress to college straight from school, take one step forward. If you were ever encouraged by your parents to attend college, take one step forward.
Presented in the media often, take one step forward.
Some things kind of struck me, like, when they were asking questions like, have you ever been stuck for a meal when you were a kid? Kind of things like that. It kind of reminds you of how underprivileged you actually are, even though you're down in Trinity now and you feel very privileged being here.
I thought I would be down the back. I'm one of the less privileged people, but I was one of the ones more to the front, so that was interesting.
I was very surprised to find that I was right at the top of the line. That is, of all the people who were there, I was amongst the very few who had experienced privilege consistently. That surprised me, actually.
I thought I'd be very back because, like, coming from my circumstances in life, but regarding the questions, I realized, like, I do have, like, little more privilege as well.
I was with my friend, we were holding hands together, and I knew kind of where I was going to be in the privilege walk, and I kind of knew where she was going to be, but we held on to each other's hand really, really tightly, and then eventually lost each other. Knowing each other, obviously we see each other in equal eyes, that it's kind of weird when we do a privilege walk. You can kind of see the distinction when your friends are away apart from each other, that it kind of feels weird.
I was surprised at how far I found myself to the front, I'll be honest. I'd never considered myself particularly privileged, and I suppose once you're involved in something like this, it can have that effect of raising awareness.
There was more diversity than you might think from a group of people in Trinity Front Square on any given day.
I've had a lot of advantages in this life, and that's given me a little bit of a boost over other people in this country and in this world.
People that see it today, to be shocked by it. The two groups need to come together, the people at the back and the people at the front, because you can't just have the people at the front doing stuff. I think all communities need to come together before change happens.
And I must say, I don't see Trinity as a very isolating place at all for any groups. I see most people have the opportunities to make the most of it if they put in the work.
We need to be aware that diversity exists within the college and within society.
Today isn't about making anyone feel bad about themselves or telling somebody that he didn't work hard enough because he had certain advantages. It's just about being here together.
Like I suppose the main reason behind that is just awareness amongst the population within Trinity. There's a lot of access students that have gone through their third level education feeling extremely isolated. I've been fortunate enough to have nothing but positive experiences when I entered third level education, but that hasn't been the case. There's been, there's even been cases of academics commenting on, why they felt a student didn't do a certain way and would base it on their class or their background instead of being supportive, really. And there has been cases where students have commented maybe on the clothing that somebody would wear, and so that exercise mightn't actually achieve anything in changing anything in the big picture. But what it will do, hopefully, is just make students a little bit more aware of the diversity that exists within their classroom, and hopefully that diversity that exists in society will one day, completely exist within Trinity College. But it's definitely taken a step forward. But if you look at state grants in Trinity College, there's only 25% of students in Trinity College on state grants. If you compare that to the likes of, the IT is especially, IT Tralee, I think it is, has, or the one in Louth, or Letterkenny, sorry, has something like 77% of students on state grants. So even though Trinity is making a step towards that, you can still see that there's not a whole lot of children from disadvantaged backgrounds actually accessing third level at Trinity. Going back a little bit to the cultural capital, social capital and human capital, I suppose what started me thinking personally about other types of capital was looking at my own experience growing up. And I remember telling my mum that I wanted to be a vet. And she obviously wanted, the most from me and the best from me. And my mum and dad worked and they worked hard to give us what we had. And if I had participated actually in that privilege walk, I would have had some more advantages than I would have realised either. Just about even the number of books in your household growing up was one of the advantages, which is something that we don't often think about. But you were at a more of advantage to other people if you had more than 10 books in your household. And my household was always full of books and reading and all those things. So that obviously stood to me at some level along the way. But I remember when I did tell my mum I wanted to be a vet, and looking at the strained look on her face as she tried to think in her head what to tell me. So, in other areas, you might be told, oh, well, your cousin studied veterinary in this place, or so-and-so down the road has a veterinary degree, maybe they can tell you what to do. But I remember looking at my mum and her just standing there blankly looking at me and actually just not knowing what to say. And she's trying to wreck her brain saying, where do I tell her where to go? And it was only when I looked back at it, and she took me by the hand and brought me into one of the vets in Tala Village, not an animal in sight, but it's just like tell her what she has to do, But it took a lot for her to have to do that, and she shouldn't have to do that, because we should be at a stage in 2016 where we all have friends who are successful and are progressed, and that I suppose ties into the whole social capital. So even if we do look at addressing the financial capital, the social capital is still majorly in deficit. And I even look at it with my own daughter now in comparison to her friends in her classroom. So Joanne lives in the exact same house, my eldest daughter who's 16. Grew up in the same house, the same estate, goes to the same school, sits in some of the same classrooms, and even has some of the same teachers. But her experience of life is completely different than mine, because I have now social capital. And I'm bringing things into her life that is improving. So it doesn't even matter that she's still in the school that she's in. It's because there's other elements coming in at home. So when she tells me she's struggling at a subject, I just go into Trinity and I ring a student that I know and say, "What, you're in second year Spanish, are you? You wouldn't give Jordan some grinds." Other parents that of kids in her classroom, they don't have that. first of all, they can't afford the grants that you would, go on the internet and look for, and they actually don't know any children or students that would be able to help them out. What was great actually about that talk in Alexandra College was 2 of the girls later contacted me that listened to me speak, to go to Alexandra College, and wanted to set up a study group between Kilnarden Community School and their school, and so that they could provide the grants to the kids. And I just thought it was a great that's where they were thinking, that how could they help and what could they do, And I think that's why it's very important for people that come from the background that I have to be able to be in them spaces, to be able to create them conversations and have them conversations, because people do genuinely want to, improve the situation of others. Without examining capital in all its forms, we will not be in a position to give an account of inequality, especially in relation to education. I would even say it's impossible in the social world with a sole focus on economic capital. Cultural capital, social capital and information capital is a huge deficit in working class areas. In Bordeaux's point of view, cultural capital is something that one acquires from equipping oneself and is reproduced by economic capital. Qualifications, knowledge, skills, the ability to speak different languages, all of them are cultural capital, which can help you obtain higher social status in society. I just tried to list what I felt were maybe some cultural capitals that existed in middle class world that might be able to help children progress in relation to within working class. So when you're growing up in a working class, not for everyone obviously, but for some, I'm going by my own experience and my friends' experiences. So when you're at home at night, like watching soaps, would be the big part of every night. Listening to music. A negative history of education within the family is a huge one. So because of the lack of education there, and parents have had a negative history with education, that sometimes can begin to resonate with the children as well. Where in a middle class cultural capital, there's a lot more reading, a lot more documentaries, learning to play instruments I felt was a huge thing. Learning the different languages, maybe going on holidays abroad, which broadened the horizon of the child. I wasn't going to put this one in relation to the Cassis report, but I suppose it is important in the sense that it could obviously potentially change education for the next so many years. Currently we're debating the Cassis report in the Education Committee, which can be quite frustrating in a sense that we have an opportunity to engage with some of the most amazing people that have worked in this field for a long time, whether it be the university presidents, whether it be the IoT presidents. Today we had people in from research background and from all the different departments. But I suppose my fear is that we're not really focusing in that committee on what can be done and how do we change it. So there's a lot of talk of rehashing the conversation about the crisis. But the report has already established that we have a crisis, so I don't really know what's going to come out of the Oireachtas Committee in terms of examining this. I know that it seems to be going back and forth and very heavily weighted on income contingent loans. But we're not getting enough time to debate that. When Peter Cassis was in today, one of the questions that I wanted to know was, did the same debt that exists, personal debt and homeowner debt, and that intergenerational debt, did that exist in the likes of Australia when they introduced loans like that? And nobody's able to answer that, So the economic climate was probably very, very different in Australia when they introduced that. And I don't think in Ireland we're in a position with the level of debt that this country has to then pass on more debt to our youth. Obviously, free fees is one of the options in the report. And like I said earlier on, obviously I'll advocate always for free fees. But I do accept and feel that it won't be enough in terms of the most disadvantaged and those that come from a background of inequality. But this makes it worse. To bring in an income contingent loan makes a hell of a lot worse. Like I said, working class people would be debt avert, and with the loan system you would see an increase in fees from the current 3,000 to between 4,000 and 5,000, as well as the income contingent loan. So there's an increase in fees and the income contingent loan. And, you know, this could rise even higher on the level of additional state investment that would be provided. And we already have the second highest rate of student charges for tuition fees of the EU countries in the OECD area, and are looking to obviously increase them more. And a lot of the feedback from the Cassis report and the people in the Oireachtas committee is, oh, well, it's not going to be like the UK and it's not going to be like America because the state stepped out and, you know, no longer was the provider of education. And this report doesn't suggest that, but that doesn't mean that once you open the door and you let loans come in, that the state won't step out at a later stage, you know. So it's very risky to even consider income contingent loans. I feel it's very well established that students from lower socio-economic backgrounds tend to be more averse to taking on debt due to their financial circumstances. Students who previously also qualified for a fee waiver under the student grant scheme due to their low levels of family income would now be required to pay the deferred charge. And I think that's something that people don't realise either, is that the loan system completely eradicates state grants. So the state grants that have helped people from lower socio-economic backgrounds to get into education would be abolished. Now they're saying that they'll use some of it to enhance maintenance grants, but that might help maybe for rural, right? So there might be a geographical disadvantage, which is always different than the disadvantage that I'm talking about. So if you look at Dublin especially, maintenance grants are not really needed as much as those that are leaving home from rural Ireland to come up and rent and stuff, and you know, and the costs that come with living alone. When you're in Dublin, it's a little bit easier because you're travelling possibly to the Dublin colleges and you're still living at home. So I don't feel that a maintenance grant is going to help education, or enhanced maintenance grant will affect it at all. Again, migration is another negative I see in relation to income contingent loans. It's not really anything got to do with education inequality, but it could serve as an incentive for people to leave the country after they've gained their education, because they won't have to pay it while they're abroad. So they would have to return before they begin paying their loans, which means that the state absorbs up a load of money anyway. So why not just have the free fees in the first place if the state has to force fund a loan system and then also absorb a huge amount of that debt? So the solution and what can be done. I could go on about the Cassis for much longer, but it's pretty boring. It is. It needs probably like a hybrid of three of those solutions. One, free fees, one is stay the same, and one is an income contingent loan. And just to say, they completely ignored the Dutch model, which is even a fairer option for an income contingent loan if you were going to go down that route. I think for me, even though I will always advocate for access to third level, I think we need to change what we do at second level and how we teach people. The level of intelligence and creativity within second level is massive, but it's not being recognised because we still insist on giving people the same exam and then trying to say that that's an equal exam because everyone sits that same exam. It's like what that student said earlier on. If the resources that have gone into both kids have been completely different, it's not an equal exam. It will never be an equal exam. And we can't continue to test kids' intelligence based on that exam. And while I was looking at trying to find solutions to inequality, more so than just education inequality, I came across a couple of videos, but I'm going to finish on playing this one video. And it's just, I felt this young man, he's a slam poet in England, and I feel he really captures why it's so important that we completely shift our thinking in primary and second level, especially second level, because that is where the aspirations of children are completely eroded away. Before I start that, at second level, I made a submission to the Education Committee about trying to address that as a solution. And it was to move education in second level towards a more community development style approach. And it was looking at Fiona O'Reilly, who's there as well, she runs a programme for GPs that trains them how to work specifically in areas of deprivation. And I felt that this model could be taken and it could be used with teachers who are going to be working in areas of deprivation so that they can understand the social context of which they're working and the lived realities of the children that they're working with, and not to act as any type of like mental health expert or social worker, but to even act as a signpost so that they know where to send the kids, or to know what to watch out for, or to know how to support them and when to support them, and to just understand, you know, that kids often enter the classroom with a school bag full of trauma, you know, and what do you do with that child, you know? And the programme would mean that teachers that it may be in their inclusive education model in their teacher training would go and do placements in youth centres, in domestic violence centres, in traveller centres, because at the minute the box they tick in terms of placement is a placement in a desk school with teachers who are already knackered, you know. So it's not probably a good standard to set, because their hopes probably of changing the system have also been eroded away, and this lack of support and resources that they have had. So I don't feel it's a fair picture that they might give in terms of hope for progression for those kids. And that's one solution that I see at second level. But I think the video that I finish on, I think he captures it much better than I do.
Revolution and Represent 107.3 FM. My name is Tarek. Now, listeners, you may remember not too long ago we had a spoken word artist by the name of Sully Breaks. Came down, dropped a live session, and a lot of you were excited about that. I was excited this morning when I opened up a package, had no idea what it was. Opened it up, put it in the player, pressed play, and it totally blew me away. It's his brand new piece from his brand new The Dorm Room EP. I'm going to have to let spoken word do what it does best and let it speak for itself. Brand new Sully Breaks.
Right now, there is a kid finishing parents' evening in a heated discussion with his mother, saying, why does he have to study subjects he will never ever use in his life? And she will look at him blank-eyed, stifle a sigh, think for a second, and then lie. She'll say something along the lines of, you know, to get a good job you need a good degree, and these subjects will help you get a good degree. We never had this opportunity when I was younger. And he will reply, but you were young a long time ago, weren't you, Mum? And she won't respond, although what he implies makes perfect sense, that society's needs would have changed since she was 16. But she will ignore him, grip his hand more sternly, then drag him to the car. But what she doesn't know is that she didn't ignore him just to shut him up. She didn't lie because they were just returning from parents' evening and an argument in the hallway would look bad on her resume. She won't lie because she's just spent the last 1 hour convincing a stern-faced teacher that she will ensure that her child studies more at home. No, she will lie simply because she does not know any better herself. Although her whole adult life she has never used or applied Pythagoras' theorem, pathetic fallacy, and still does not know the value of x, she will rely on society to tell her that her child, who has one of the sharpest minds in the school, is hyperactive, unfocused, easily distracted, and wayward. Students, how many equations, subjects, and dates did you memorize just before an exam never to use again? How many A grades did you get which were never asked for when you applied for a job? How many times have you remembered something 5 minutes just after the teacher said stop writing, only to receive your results 1 month later to realize that you were only 1 mark short of the top grade? Does that mean remembering 5 minutes earlier would have made you more qualified for a particular job? Well, on the application form it would have. We all have different abilities, thought processes, experiences, and genes. So why is a class full of individuals tested by the same means? So does that mean Sherelle thinks she's dumb because she couldn't do a couple of sums? And if this issue is not addressed properly, it then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Then every school has the audacity to have a policy on equality. The irony. Exams are society's methods of telling you what you're worth. But you can't let society tell you what you are, because it's the same society that tells you that abortion is wrong but then looks down on teenage parents. The same society that sells products to promote natural hair, looks and smooth complexion, with the model on the box half photoshopped and has fake lashes and hair extensions, with pastors that preach charity but own private jets, imams that preach against greed but are all fat, parents that say they want educated kids but constantly marvel at how rich Richard Branson is. Governments that preach peace but endorse wars, that say they believe so much in the importance of higher education and further learning, then why increase tuition fees every single year? I believe Miss Jefferson when she took me into the office and said that my exams would be imperative to my success, because we was taught to always follow when Miss Jefferson led. But then I took Jefferson out of the equation and learned to think for myself. I realized we was taught to always follow when Miss led. The irony. Test us with tests, but the finals are never final, because they never prepare us for the biggest test, which is survival. And what I suggest is fairly outlandish, so I do not expect everyone to understand this, except for the kids who knows what it feels like to be worth no more than that D or that A that you get on results day, and the ones whose best stories were never good enough for the English teacher, because apparently you missed out key literal techniques, did not follow the class plan, and the language was too informal for him to understand. But then he'd reference Hamlet and Macbeth, and you'd fight the urge to express your contempt by partially clenching your fist with only your medius finger left protruding in the middle of your hand, and then asked if he was aware that Shakespeare was known as the innovator of slang. Or the kid at the back of the class who thinks, why am I studying something that doesn't fuel my drive? But then when confronted with a maths problem, his eyes come alive. So this one is for my generation, the ones who found what they were looking for on Google, the ones who followed their dreams on Twitter, pictured their future on Instagram, accepted destiny on Facebook. This one's for my failures and my dropouts, for my unemployed graduates, my shop assistants, cleaners and cashiers with bigger dreams, my self-employed entrepreneurs, my world changers and my dream chasers, because the purpose of why I hate school but love education was not to initiate a worldwide debate, but to let them know that whether 72 or 88, 44 or 68, we will not let exam results decide our fate. Peace. Just these pictures on my phone, sitting all alone, visualizing home. And all my friends were just these pictures on my phone, pictures on my phone, pictures on my phone.
So I think he captures it really well, I suppose, and how we need to start looking at education. And it's very much for me around, we still have a 19th century education system in the 21st century, and we need to very much catch up. Obviously, I'm going to blame any mistakes I made tonight on inequality. And I'll answer any questions obviously that you have. Sorry for going over time, Richard.
Thank you very much.